Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Welcome to the first StartupGrind-Zagreb. It's my pleasure to see you all here. And allow me to introduce Ivo Spigel, our speaker today. My name is Augustin Jarak. I'm the host and director of StartupGrind-Zagreb. A little bit about myself. I've been in the startup world for a couple of years, and I've seen more than a few startup grind videos, and I thought to myself, wow, we can do something like that here, so we can tell the entrepreneurial stories of our accomplished entrepreneurs, business angels, and many other things. So without further ado, welcome to Startup Grind. Welcome, Ivo. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Augustin. Thanks for the invitation. It's kind of a privilege to be invited as the first colleague to chat with and the first Startup Grind in Zagreb, so I hope we have many more successful events like this one. I think it's always good and useful to have situations where you can enable people to learn from each other, share experiences, war stories, and all that kind of stuff. So, my name is Ivo Špigel. I was born in Zagreb quite a few years ago. I spent part of my younger years in the States, in New York and Long Island, and then basically finished mathematical high school here in Mielec, and also electrical engineering and computing faculty, so FER, or ETF as it was known then. A few years after university, I started an IT company with some colleagues, and that company is still alive today. So it's actually, we're just celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, yeah. So it's called Perpetuum Mobile, and that's my main professional occupation. So I'm a board member. I was a CEO for a long time, and then my colleague and my partner and myself switched roles. So now my colleague Bledim Sela is our CEO, and I have a management board member. That's my main role, helping to run the company, marketing, business development, etc. Aside from that, I do a couple of other things. I write a regular monthly column here for an IT magazine called Mreža. I also contribute from time to time to the Croatian edition of Forbes. And a little more than a year ago, with some colleagues from Europe, from a couple of different European countries, we started a technology publication, an online publication called Tech.eu, where my official title is co-founding editor. So there, from time to time, I write about, well, Tech.eu as a publication is focused on Europe. It's focused on European high-tech and technology startups and high-growth companies. I think we are a little bit different than other tech blogs because we try to cover really all of Europe, not just the major centers or hubs. And we also have more of an analytical and long-form format than most blogs. So we're not so much going after the breaking news type of content. We're trying to cover in-depth analysis of companies, of trends, and generally what's going on in Europe. So just as an example, just today before our chat, my latest post was going online on Tech.eu, talking about the company that started in Denmark, but is now really a global company called Tradeshift. So I did an interview with the CEO of Tradeshift called Christian Lang a couple of days ago after many months of coordination. And so that piece just went up live today on Tech.eu. So that's an example of that part. Also, obviously we're having our chat here in the Zip Startup Incubator, and this is a program that I co-founded with 3 colleagues. It'll now be soon 3 years ago. So in the spring of 2012. And Zip basically wanted to do something small, and it turned out to take up a lot of our time. But we're now seeing the 6th generation, where you're also participating, coming into the final stage of the programs. We have the demo day next week, which we're very much looking forward to. The seats are being rapidly taken, reserved, booked. So that's another piece of what I'm doing. And finally, based on my journalist work and my networking contacts, I've been writing a book of interviews with European founders of high-tech startups for too long time. But hopefully, actually not hopefully, but the plan is that this book will finally be launched in late April or early May of this year.
Eagerly waiting for the book.
Yes, me too.
So, can you tell us a little bit how the startup community really started here in Croatia?
Well, it's hard to say, to pinpoint it. I guess my first, I've been around startups for a long time, but I could say the first time I came to kind of a local ecosystem meeting was, I think, in the fall of 2009. And it was Startup Wednesday, or Startup Sreda, as we call it here. And I always like to tell this story because I think it reflects a lot about how the things are developing both in Croatia and in Europe. That gathering was in the cafe bar called Lobby. If you know, it's in the building where Erste Banka is based. And that cafe has 2 floors, so we were up on the gallery of the cafe, and there were maybe 10 or 12 people around a single table. And as usual, when you meet with geeks, they were all talking very, very quietly among each other, and it was like semi-dark, so it was like, how shall I say, a very small beginning. Today, most of the events in Zagreb and Croatia, you get, I don't know, full rooms, 50 people, 100 people, depending obviously on the situation, the occasion. So things have really developed both in Europe and in Croatia. We've gone far from what, obviously Croatia is in many ways not as advanced and developed as the major European economies, but nevertheless we are now seeing some first big successes by local startups, that some of them we have hosted here in this space and talked about things with them. And obviously in Europe as well, there have been tremendous changes since, let's say, 2007, 8, 9 up until today. Witnessed not just by myself, but almost all of the entrepreneurs that I mentioned before, that I talked to them and we discussed the ecosystem. So it has really progressed a lot since then.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, 2 of Croatian startups are winners of a Pioneer contest, was it?
Yes, Pioneer Festival, Pioneers Festival.
Second year in a row.
It's called the Pioneers Challenge, yeah, that's right. So back in 2013, the winner was, then they were called, today it's Bella Beat, but then it was Baby Watch.
Oh,
yeah, so it was called Baby Watch at the time, and it's actually a Croatian-Slovenian, so very politically correct startup, because there's a Croatian guy and a very beautiful young lady from Slovenia, Uška. So they were the winners of Pioneers in 2013. And then last year it was Oradian, which is very international, so the founders are all from all over the place, but it's based in Croatia. So for me, watching that, it was a double pleasure because they're from my country, but also because actually I was the one who was able to break the story about Oradian on Tech.eu. So we were the first publication to write about them after quite a long period of stealth development.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I like to use Oradian as an example of a company that's made of co-founders that came from different countries to build the development center here in Croatia. And I asked them, so why would you come here? Why not London or some of the hubs?
Yeah.
It's beautiful, it's cheap, what more could I want?
It's really interesting, exactly. It's a very unusual example. As you know, many of our friends are often pitching about how Croatia has so many problems, government, bureaucracy, blah, blah, blah. And then here you have an example. So the 4 co-founders, one is from Africa, one is from Nigeria, one is from South Africa, but actually born in Croatia, but when he was very small, he lived there. A German guy and a US guy. And the US guy also has some kind of long roots in Croatia, but like 2 or 3 generations ago. So yeah, they decided specifically to base the company in Zagreb because of some of the reasons you mentioned. It's interesting to also to note that they got good support from the Croatian government. So they got a pretty important to them a loan from HBR, the Government Development Bank. And they found obviously a good team of programmers that we were able to hire. So they have a number of reasons why they felt that Zagreb was the right place to be. And to me it was a really unusual example, but very nice to see.
Yeah, yes it is. So, can I ask you more about the creation of Zip? So you mentioned it started with Startup Wednesday. I know I was there, and in the defense of lobby, that was a huge desk.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty big desk. How did Zip happen? You know, we should build an incubator. How did that happen?
Well, I've known so there are 4 co-founders, three colleagues and myself, Miho, Sasha, and Damir. So Damir I have known for a very long time because, as you know, he built ISKON. He was the founder of ISKON, which was a very successful build, the first private ISP in Croatia, and then later sold that. The company was acquired by Croatian Telecom, so that was for Damir a very sizable success. And basically, he and I have known each other from the early days of ISKON because my company was involved with the creation of ISKON's first portal, which was called click.hr. So Perpetuum Mobile actually built Click, and then with some friends and partners, and then very soon after the launch, ISKON showed an interest, and they actually acquired that project from the group that had founded it. And that's actually when I first met Damir, so it was very early days for ISKON at the time. They were getting it was 1999, 2000. So that's when I know Damir from. And Miho and Sasha I just met sometime before we started Zip. And basically it was early 2012. The 4 of us kind of got together for a couple of coffees and then 1 or 2 lunches and things like that. And we were actually discussing the environment in Croatia for startups, the ecosystem, and what's going on. So we felt that there were more and more interesting projects, but there was very little support. So there was very little infrastructure. Everything that was normal in the big cities like Berlin and London and Paris, there was none of that here. So there was no co-working space, there was no very little investment opportunity, there were no VCs, there was a pretty bad regulatory environment, the legal laws and things like that. So we kind of felt that it would probably make sense to start some kind of a framework that would start solving some of those issues one by one. So all 4 of us are entrepreneurs by our background, and if you know one thing about entrepreneurs, the basic thing is you scratch an itch. So you have a feeling that, I don't know, it would be really nice to have a drone flying around this room and taking nice pictures of people, and then you start building it or something like that. So for us, the itch was the problem with the startups. So we saw that there was a hole in the ground or a hole in the environment, and we tried, what can we do to fill that hole? And we actually, our first step was to try and create some kind of a national program that we would then kind of pitch to the government. And that didn't really go anywhere. And then as part of this overall program, we thought it would be not so bad idea to have a co-working space, started looking for space. We got some support from the university for build the other space where our colleagues are right now in Zvonimira. And then Sasha decided also to adapt part of this building to create this office space. We also got involved with Seed Camp at an early stage, Geeks on a Plane, etc. But basically the idea was that the 4 of us felt that something needed to be done in this area. We were quite tired and frustrated about trying to do anything on a macro level. So on a macro level, if you want to change something in the environment, you have to talk to politicians, they never do anything, blah, blah, blah. And this is something that we felt that we could do ourselves, of course with the support of many, many friends and colleagues and partners, etc. And that's kind of, so over several roštilj lunches we talked about what we could do. That's basically the idea.
Well, I'm glad you did that.
Yes, so are we.
That gives me the opportunity to be in the incubator right now. So I wanted to ask you more about the financing. So this is the first time Zip is financing winners,
teams, some selected teams. Yeah.
and you use the crowdfunding for that. Can you elaborate more on that?
Sure. I mean, obviously, financing is critical to every company, to whether it's a startup or it's not a startup or any kind of entrepreneurial activity. And unfortunately, I mean, the further east you go from, let's say, London and Paris, the less there is of VC financing. But still, in Czech Republic and Poland, there are quite a nice number of VC funds, etc. Southeast Europe is really like empty in that sense. So the only VC fund in all of ex-Yugoslavia is RSG Capital in Ljubljana, Slovenia. But of course, that, as we know, that fund also invested in several Croatian projects, which is good. It just means that you can attract financing across the borders. So the lack of VC funding in Croatia is also causing the lack of angel investors. There are some angel investors, as you know, Sasha and Mihovil are both active in the Croatian angel network, in Crane. However, it's very limiting, because if you're an angel investor in Croatia and you invest in a project, at some point the basic idea is that you're expecting an exit. Yeah. And if there are no local VCs, then you have to rely on that project that you invested in, finding external either funding or acquirers, which is always possible, but it's always more difficult. So that problem is still not solved. We are always hearing about some new VC funds coming on, and I believe they are coming, probably before the summer. At least one regional fund, which will be probably cover ex-Yugoslavia, except for Slovenia. And also, of course, on the other hand, it's getting easier and easier each year to get funded internationally by teams from here. We have seen, as you know, teams get funded from Bulgarian VCs, from some Hungarian also investment groups, and that's all great. However, from our perspective as ZIP, we are now at the end of our 6th generation, and we decided at some point last year that it would be a good idea if we could provide at least seed, like on a very small level funding. We had met the team at Cedars a few months before that. I actually met CEO Jeff Lynn at a conference in Madrid a few months before that. So just shows that sometimes there is actual value coming from the conferences, not just wasting time. And yeah, so Mihovil, who has the strongest financial background out of the 4 founders, felt that we could give it a shot and try the crowdfunding approach. And that went very well. We went above, our goal was, I think, initially 60,000 euros, roughly, and then we made it to like 85,000. All of those are very small numbers, but nevertheless, for teams in the earliest stages, even a small investment can make a big difference.
Yes, it can.
Yeah. So yeah, we will be deciding on this investment over the next couple of days, and then we will announce that on the demo day. And we'll see what happens next. Hopefully, with some of the VCs coming in, with more and more networking with international investors, we will see also more funding being available to Croatian startups. Also, of course, as well as with the success of the ones that have already done a lot of work, like Farmeron and Belabit and Oredian and the others, the more success we see from local startups internationally, the more international vendors, founders, investors will be looking more closely at what's happening here in the environment.
Yeah, they'll be more drawn here.
Yes, yeah. Also, from what I heard just today, actually, from Mihovil, is that apparently very soon there will be a grant scheme from the government to match early stage investment funds by the government as well. That's supposedly happening very soon, but I will believe it when I finally see that it's happening.
Yeah, I've heard of a similar system too in Korea and...
Almost every country has something like that. Most of the systems are a little bit different. For instance, in the UK, there is an enterprise investment scheme which gives you very attractive tax deductions if you invest in startups. Other countries have other methods, but almost every country has some kind of a system in place to support high-risk investment.
That's pretty cool,
yeah.
We recently also had some positive changes regarding the taxes. Now you can pay a bill without having to pay.
Oh, the VAT.
Yeah,
that's
that also
yes.
helps, yeah. Since Croatia is now within the European Union, that will also bring some European investors. Well, European we are.
Yeah.
In Europe.
Investors outside of Croatia, yes. I mean, being part of the EU is going to bring, I think, many interesting changes. There is for instance, just as an example, there is a Finnish online bank called Holvi, which is completely virtual, so they have no branches, just online, and which is also going soon to be available to Croatian customers. So, and the only reason it's possible is that there is EU-wide regulation that says if you complete certain requirements, then you can do pan-European or some number. They're not going pan-European, they're going to 19 different countries. It's mostly Eurozone countries, so where the euro is, but also a few exceptions like, I think, Poland, Croatia, and something else. Referring back to them. So the consequence of that is going to be that Croatian citizens are now going to be able to use an online bank that's based in Finland without a problem. And similar things are going to be happening not just with banking, but in investment funds and other financial instruments. So all of those are extremely positive consequences of joining the EU.
So good news and opportunities are on the horizon.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always difficulties as well.
So let me jump to something close to the book.
Huh?
Let's keep the book for the end because it's the best part.
Okay.
Yeah, research for the book. You talk to so many founders from everywhere.
From many places, yeah.
Yeah. How do you compare Croatian startup founders to startup founders from other countries? What are the main differences, main similarities?
Well, the first thing is that actually I really don't think you can say, I mean, generalities are very, 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 it's very hard to do them properly.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say, European founders compared to American founders are, to a very small degree, I think that's true.
Yeah.
But much more importantly, actually, founders everywhere are much more the same. So a startup founder from Croatia, from Italy, or from England has much more in common with each other than with his colleagues from Croatia. So if you take yourself or other friends and colleagues that are going to the ZIP program, if you look at the way they think, they act, what they're doing, what their ambitions are, you can easily compare them to a startup founder from the UK or from Australia or from the US. So they have much more in common with other startup founders than they do with other Croatians, let me put it that way. Having said that, obviously sometimes the environment where you're thinking about your project has a consequence on the way you approach it. What I'm saying is that people often tend to behave similarly to what they see around them. Back in 2009, when I was talking about the first Startup Wednesday that I attended, all those guys there were like completely isolated. So there was nobody else to talk to, there was nobody else doing anything about startups. So if you were doing startups back then, in 2009, 8, or 7, you're even, not just in Croatia, but even in London or Paris, you were kind of a little bit weird guy or girl. Today it's very different, it's much more acceptable, there are many more people doing it. But the more intensive the environment is around you, if you go to California, to the Valley, everybody's getting funded, doing an IPO, there's much more pressure in the air. Not just compared to Croatia, but compared to other places in the US, compared to Austin or I don't know, Philadelphia or places like those. So since there's that much you're feeling, you're seeing people around you that are really moving very, very fast, then you're also somehow motivated by your environment. So that's a little bit different. The Croatian environment is much different than even the one in bigger European cities, especially compared to New York or Boston or the Valley. So the environment is different, and that also to a degree causes the founders and the entrepreneurs to behave a little bit differently. We try to compensate for that in ZIP by applying, as you know, a lot of pressure on the teams going through the program, specifically because in Croatia, as soon as you have a job, if you're younger than 30, you're one of the lucky 50% because half the people are employed. So that's an achievement. In the UK or the US, it's not an achievement if you have a job, it's just normal. So what I'm saying is that the crisis and the recession in Croatia are actually somehow lowering the expectations that the environment has towards entrepreneurs. But like I said, if you look at the attitude of the people to go into a startup project, basically you have to be a little bit crazy, and that's just as true in Zagreb as it is in London.
I would like to think that because of the circumstances of everything and the state of the ecosystem, the startups from Croatia are a little bit more legal.
Yes, yeah, that's true. I think. When you talk to Western investors, if you talk to funds in the UK, US, and obviously those that are interested in investing outside of their own town, which is not most of them, then the typical comment for Eastern European startups is that they're more aggressive, more ambitious, they're more driven, because the environment they're coming from doesn't make it so easy as in the West to have a nice, well-paid, very, very comfortable job in some other company or organization, although that's changing too. So generally, to a small degree, you could say that Eastern European teams and founders are more driven, they're sometimes more resourceful, there's obviously good technical talent. So like I said, that's true to a degree, but you have to take those comparisons and generalizations with kind of big chunk of salt, because you see very driven people in every country. I mean, I could have all these examples.
Yeah. So actually, yeah, it's a good question to ask you. You probably know it. I've been asked a couple of times to give an example of a successful exit for a Croatian startup. I can only think of ISKON, even though is it a startup? It isn't.
Well, ISKON was definitely a startup. I mean, when it started, it was a startup. Then it grew into a small but significant telecom, and then was acquired by another telecom. So well, that's an exit. Then HG Spot, but that's a little bit more colorful history. But nevertheless, HG Spot, which is the computer retailer that our colleague Hrvoje Prpić founded, was at one time did an IPO. So Hrvoje decided to cash in at that time and made apparently a really good decision, and he's now building new projects. So that was also a form of an exit. It's not a typical exit like most startups have in terms of being acquired by a larger technology company or doing a real IPO. But those are some of the examples. But there are also entrepreneurial examples with companies that are not necessarily startups. For instance, as we know, our colleague Sasha built a successful chain of pharmacies and exited that to a large Croatian company, Atlantic Group. So there have been various kinds of exits. But the fact is that, as you mentioned, there are not so many examples. If you look at really startups, let's call them proper startups, then the whole ecosystem is very young. So it's very early days. I mean, we all have to, people often don't understand the fact that Silicon Valley was created in the early 50s in the US. And it didn't happen by accident, it didn't happen by itself. It happened because a very small number of people sat down and said, let's create Silicon Valley. So it was, Stanford professors, military people, people from large industrial companies that said, well, this is what we want to do something around Stanford and create this environment. Obviously, it was a fantastic success, but it didn't happen by accident. And it wasn't necessarily by the government. So, the government was involved, but it was more entrepreneurs and academia, basically. And so that was like almost 70 years ago. And here we are in Croatia. The real startup scene basically started slowly happening 2007, 2008, 2009, so just a few years ago. And as we have seen a few months here in ZIP, we had a discussion with 4 really very interesting and talented founders whose companies are now starting to get funded by a couple of $1 million funding rounds, which is, for us quite significant. But these companies have been building the companies for 4, 5, 6 years. So although we always talk about speed, some things simply take time. And especially in an environment where there's not that much funding available. So all these things are interconnected. Our companies are getting to this critical level one by one, and we'll be seeing more and more of them. And then somewhere down the road, somebody's going to acquire Bellabeat, or so one of them may do an IPO, and then we'll see. We can just hope that those founders will perhaps then come back into the environment, start investing into more startups, and that's kind of the way things happen. Although that's, again, one thing that we can say when we're comparing environments, American entrepreneurs are much more likely to fund new companies than European ones. So in Europe, especially in Europe, there are many large companies that are quite old. So I don't know, Volkswagen, chemical companies, etc. And the very rich people in Europe that are large owners or shareholders in these companies are kind of old school. So they're large or very rich German or French companies, and usually they don't care about technology or startups. Anything, they buy boats, they buy castles, yachts, planes, things like that. So Europe is only now seeing a change in generations where a bunch of successful entrepreneurs, one after another, are building large successful companies and becoming angel investors themselves. Obviously it's been going on for a few years, but not 30 or 40 or 50 years. It's like, let's say, 10, 15 years, and the last 6, 7 years in particular. So these things take time.
Well, we're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there. I mean, things are progressing. We're seeing better and better teams. More interesting things are happening. We don't have enough time on our hands in Tech.eu to cover all the things we'd like to cover. But we try to cover the best.
Well, I can't wait any longer. The book.
Okay.
Let's start with the book.
So yeah, with the book, the way the book got started is that back in 2010, I did an interview with 2 Slovenian guys, Boštjan and Andraž, who founded a company called Zemanta, which started out as a tool for bloggers, and today it has some other products that are used for advertising, targeted advertising, etc. So anyway, they were interesting to me, first of all, because they were one of the very early successes, successfully got into Seed Camp, which is a successful step, out of the region. So they were from Ljubljana, they got accepted into Seed Camp in 2007, I believe, or 8. And actually, one of the investors, after they went through the Seed Camp program into that company, was Union Square Ventures, which is led by Fred Wilson and is one of the best-known venture capital funds in all of the US. So all that for me was really interesting. So I talked to those guys, did an interview, it came out in Croatian Forbes, and then my editor here, Viktor Bresnik, and I thought that was an interesting approach. So I did a couple of more interviews in the next couple of issues here. One of them was with Loïc Lemaire, who is well known for La Web, French high-tech conference. And he was at the time basically building Seismic as a Twitter tool, Twitter client, but that didn't succeed. The conference succeeded very well. And then a few others. So after I had done a couple of these interviews, I thought, no, this is really nice. Basically, I have all the material here. All I have to do is just put it in a book. And that was like 5 years ago. So since then, I've done many of these interviews, some for Forbes, some specifically for the book itself. And it's taken a long time for a number of reasons. Actually, one of the reasons is that Forbes is a monthly. So the rhythm of doing the interviews was really, really slow. Another reason is that I'm lazy and keep, just procrastinating on things. And another reason is that I'm doing all these different things. So as I always tell, when we're mentoring startups, I always tell them to do just one thing and do really, really well, and not to take me as an example, but that's different because...
Do what I say, don't do what I do.
Yeah, something like that. But anyhow, here we are. The crowdfunding campaign is launching next week, and the book should be out there by the end of April, early May. They'll probably have like 25, 26 interviews, and maybe adding 2 or 3 more. So maybe between 25 and 30 chapters in the book itself. Some of the people I interviewed were Morten Lund, who was one of the very early backers of Skype, and also investor in TradeShift, and many other companies. Martin Warsawski, who built up Phone, if you know the Wi-Fi, global Wi-Fi network of devices. But he's a serial entrepreneur, so before Phone, he built up a whole series of companies, one of the biggest telecoms operators in Spain and a few other ones. Let's see, Alicia Navarro, who is an Australian with a Spanish name, who built a startup called Skimlinks, which enables large publications to monetize their content by automating links to e-commerce products. So for instance, if Bug Magazine is writing about a new computer and somebody clicks through Bug and buys it from Amazon, then Bug would get a piece of that. So affiliate marketing essentially, but on a very, very massive scale. Ilkka Pananen, who built up Supercell, which was 50% funded by the Japanese company SoftBank at a valuation of 3 billion euros, just a couple of last year, I guess. Branko Milutinovic, who is building Ordeus, so the Belgrade, Serbia-based, one of the most successful sports games globally. Leslie and Nigel Eccles, who are doing Fanduel, which is they're building it out of Scotland, but all the customers are in the US. And it's, again, it's a online game where you pick sports teams and they compete against each other. And it's amazingly successful, has a ton of users, and is making tons of money. A couple of French people. So probably easily the most complicated name of any of the entrepreneurs in the book is a guy called Pierre Kosciuszko-Morizet. So this guy built what is usually called the French eBay, called Price Minister, and this is acquired by a Japanese e-commerce giant called Rakuten for $200 million. Cedric Tournay, who is still the CEO of Dailymotion, which is a very, very large video network. They were supposed to be acquired, I think, by Yahoo, and then the French government blocked the deal and didn't want that to happen because they're a very important company in France, and of course all the investors got really, really pissed off. So yeah, there's a long list of the only non-European guy there is David McClure, who is, I think, a very familiar name to everyone. So I decided to include Dave in the book because he's been so active in traveling all over the globe, including Europe. And there was also a Twitter discussion where somebody said on Twitter, "Who is the David McClure of Europe?" And then Dave immediately responded, "I'm the David McClure of Europe." So I thought that was interesting and asked him to also be in the book as well. The only, I guess, person who is not really an entrepreneur but is a venture investor is Fred Destin, who is a Belgian guy who was in the States until recently in Boston and has now returned to Europe, to London, one of the most accomplished venture investors in Europe. And basically, some discussions I had with Fred way back a few years ago were one of the things that inspired me to write the book. So I asked also Fred, would he be willing to be interviewed for the book itself and for Forbes, etc. So those are some of the colorful characters that you'll be able to read about.
So does the book have a name?
Oh yeah, sorry. So the book is called the European Startup Revolution. I had some more, let's say, philosophical or poetic names in mind. And then I did it very early on. I have a newsletter, a mailing list for people who are interested to follow the developments. And then I did a survey, like all startups should, with these people that are following me, and asked them between 2 different versions, and this one kind of came out on top. So it's being self-published, actually. Tech.eu is going to be a publishing partner. So essentially it's a self-publishing project, but Tech.eu is also participating in the process, in the marketing and distribution. It's primarily an ebook, but there's also going to be a paper-based version. Obviously on on Amazon Amazon has a section called Create Space, which lets you print on demand. So whenever somebody buys two books get printed. So I don't have any boxes of books lying around, unless I really need them to share with friends and things like that.
Well, that is excellent news. I can't wait to get my hands on the book.
Yeah,
I like the paper versions. I don't know why. I just love the tactile sensation of the book.
Yes, I agree. There's a feeling when you read on paper that's different than when you read, and it depends also on which type of book. If it's a large illustrated book, then paper works much better. But yeah, e-books and electronic publishing are, to me, another very, very fascinating, interesting area. So I'm happy to be doing this also as a kind of personal experiment to see how it comes out.
I'm sure it's going to be great.
I hope so.
I'd like to take this time to ask if there are any questions from the audience about, well, anything.
Anything.
Yeah.
We're not on Reddit, but you can still ask me anything.
Yeah.
See, it's typical. Ah, there's a question. Excellent.
So, what's like your most important advice that you will give to some young entrepreneurs and startups?
That's a really tough one because there are different things that are important. So there's no single magic bullet. People sometimes ask about biggest mistakes or things like that. I would say one of the things that I, and also some of my colleagues, didn't do well in our first stage of development of our company was we were often not as willing to ask hard questions and make tough decisions as we should have. So there were several situations in development of Perpetuum Mobile, my company, where we should have been tougher on ourselves and our colleagues, especially when it comes to people. So the people on your team are obviously super important, which everyone knows. However, when you see that a person is not the right person for the job, and so you're not in a dilemma, you know it. Then I personally did too many times prolong things out, like we'll have to see, maybe things work out, maybe she or he gets better or starts communicating with their colleagues better, but actually it doesn't work out. And happily I have to say that we've had a few situations where we asked somebody to leave, and it actually turned out as a blessing for them. We had my favorite example is, we had a guy who was a developer, and he was just not very good. So, but we thought, if we fired him, it's going to be a problem, blah, blah, blah. We ended up firing him. We should have done it long before. And by the way, and he loved to travel all his life. So whenever he had any vacation time, he would, instead of going to the Adriatic, he would go to Guatemala or, I don't know, India or someplace. So what he did was actually, after we asked him to leave, he went to Dubai, I think, and took some kind of training for being a host on the plane. So it's not a stewardess, it's a steward, whatever. Attendant, flight attendant, there you go. So he went to this training, he became a flight attendant, and now he's flying for, I don't know, Qatar or Emirates or some very well-known airline, and he's happy as a, really, so he totally changed his career into something where he can, do the job and also travel all the time to all these different places. So it turned out to be it doesn't always turn out like that. But we've learned over time that actually when you have a situation where you feel that if somebody leaves, it's going to be a gigantic disaster for everything, it actually, doesn't. Obviously you have critical people, but so if there's one piece of it, go about advice, but people tend, depends again on the character of the person, but very often people tend to avoid or they tend to push back, delay hard choices, tough decisions, and hard questions. So the sooner you learn not to do that, the better.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
How did you? Okay, so
sure. More questions. Yes.
Already started. So, how did you first assemble your own team and get the funds for yourself when you started?
Well, we didn't get any funds. We had, it was basically a couple of friends and myself. We were actually working together in an organization that was kind of semi-state run. It was back in the pre-capitalist times, so it's hard to describe. Anyway, within that organization, we had like a team already that was working on some things, including AI and robotics, but also we were developing some basically accounting software. We felt that this organization that was larger wasn't the right environment, so we decided to just kind of go on our own. So when we started the company, we were already like a team of friends. And this is like the early days of being able to set up a private company. And
How old were you?
so this was '89, I was 27.
I was 0.
Yeah. and my friends were 23. So I was lucky because I had already graduated, and as soon as we started the company, they all left college basically, and one of them went back many years later and got his degree, and the others haven't. So, but you know, they have more important things to do. So yeah, we started out basically as friends. We also had down the road some serious disagreements. So that led to some friendships being less friendly, but that can often happen. In terms of friends and non-friends, one of my favorite examples is Nordius, which I mentioned earlier. So for viewers who might not know, Nordius is a company based in Belgrade in Serbia that develops essentially social network-based sports games. The whole strategy of that company is based around friends. So it was started by 3 friends. They were Serbian guys from Belgrade. They used to be working in Denmark in Microsoft. And after spending a few years learning a lot of important things and making some money on the side so they could sustain themselves, they all went back to Belgrade. And they basically based the whole HR philosophy of the company on friends. So for a long time, it took them about a year of basically not sleeping, no weekends, no free time, just developing the game. Really like, you know, hold down in a bunker and did nothing but develop the thing. And it became profitable after the first month. So they've been profitable from day one, basically. They're making a lot of money today, and they haven't had any funding ever, so it's a totally bootstrap thing. But their whole philosophy was, you know, as soon as they needed to hire new people, they looked for their friends that they went to high school with and that they went to university with. So those first 10, 15 people are now the core management of the company, and then they continue looking. I mean, at some point you can't just keep hiring friends, but the core team in that particular company is really based around a very, very strong community of friends that go back many years. And you know, when people ask you, can you start a company out of Zagreb, Belgrade, I don't know, if it's not London, Nordius would never be successful, or at least not as much as it is, if they had, you know, moved from Belgrade and gone to London or Silicon Valley or someplace like that. They would have had to do it differently. It might have worked out, maybe not. But in their case, it's a specific case where the fact that they stayed in Belgrade was for them a gigantic competitive advantage compared to their competitors. So I think it's a really interesting and very, very, very useful story.
So for a startup with a really fresh idea, isn't it more important to go with that idea, like talk about it, do some marketing and stuff, or just do some developing first and then do the rest? So what is more important?
Development. So if you have a good idea, build it as soon as you can. Make sure that you understand who your customer is as precisely as you can. So very few ideas are for everyone. So Facebook is for everyone, Twitter is for everyone. But most good ideas, most successful startups have a very clear understanding of their customer. Get that early on. Go read Eric Ries's Lean Startup. I mean, there are many books, but that's a really good one to start with if you haven't read it. But the main idea is have a really, really good understanding of the customer. Don't overbuild. Don't have too much functionality. Just release. and see how people work with that product. There's a really critical stage that I've seen with almost all startups, and that's will people really take the time to use it. Don't worry about pricing, don't worry about marketing, that's all later. The key thing is, okay, we have a startup here in Zip that's building software for hockey coaches. And Philip, who is building it, is he used to play hockey. His brother is a professional hockey player, so he knows all about hockey. He's just launching that product now, and that's where the critical time happens to see whether the users, the coaches, will really give it attention. It's not even a question of whether they can afford it, whether it's too expensive, etc. Everybody's time is really critical, and time is under attack from everything, from your friends, your baby that just was born 2 months ago, or your wife, or your sports team, or something. And then whatever product you're building, there's this kind of acid test. Once you get it out, will they really want it? Will they use it? And that's, so if you see they're not using it, maybe you need to tweak it and change it. But yeah, go out, build it as soon as possible, and marketing really comes later, unless you have something that's like totally dependent on marketing. But in most cases, yeah, build it. And you know, when you mentioned if you have a really cool idea, it's almost always a really bad idea to keep the idea to yourself. There are, again, a few exceptions. But in general, you know, share your idea with your friends, ask them what they think about it. If they say it's a stupid idea, maybe they're wrong. Maybe you understand it better. I mean, if the guys that built Twitter went around San Francisco saying, will you use a product that can only take 140 characters and blah, and if they describe Twitter, I guess, you know, everybody would say, nobody's going to use it. It's an idiotic idea. But it got used. So
it saves time.
Yeah, but yeah, build it as soon as you can. If you are you technical? Are you a programmer?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. That's always good. I mean, my advice usually to people who aren't technical is, you know, learn to program. Even if you're not going to be the one developing the program, it makes it much easier to talk with your programmers.
Thank you.
Well, if there are no more, okay, let's make this last
So
one.
when you say like get the first version of the product out, so what's like the best way to deliver the product to the customers because they don't know about it yet? So
that really depends on the product.
It's like a mobile app maybe. So is it possible to get it to the customers without pre-or marketing?
I mean, you know, most people have friends.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have friends, ask them to try it.
Like just start like viral.
Again, it depends on who's it for. We have another project here that is for young parents with very small children. So they need to reach out to young parents with very small children. That means that if they have friends who are not young parents, that they're useless more or less. So depending if your product is targeted, we have another startup that got funded from Bulgaria that's intended for nutritionists. So Mirna, who founded this product called Green Pie, you know, before she launched, she found any possible way to reach American nutritionists. She went on LinkedIn, she looked for emails, looked at blogs, just kind of really killed herself for months and months trying to reach enough nutritionists in the United States from Croatia that would maybe want to use her product. And then after a lot of energy, she succeeded. So the question is, where are your users? Zemanta that I mentioned is a product for bloggers. So the guys were able to find bloggers that were very popular, that other bloggers would follow and read about them. You just, whoever your product is for, you have to find a way to reach them. And usually it's not going to be through advertising. Because if it's advertising, that means you have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Advertising usually comes, if you need it at all, which not all products need, but if you need advertising, that usually comes after you know it's working, people are really happy with it, it's growing, and then you need something to make it grow faster. But it's been proven. You know that it works. So now all you need is awareness, visibility, ads, or something. But in the very early stage, you have to find them by yourself. We say in Croatian, it's manual labor, namisice.
Okay.
And you can't substitute that.
If there are no more questions, I would like to thank Ivo for finding the time to come here and do the interview. And I would like to thank our sponsors, Zip, which once again, thank you, Ivo.
Well, thanks for the invite. As I said, it's a privilege to be the first StartupGrind-Zagreb person being interviewed, and thanks to our small but dedicated audience to show up today. And lots of luck with StartupGrind going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much.